Hello. Hello, Quasi. Hello, Kat. Hello, Vanietta. Hello, Michaela. Hello, Kellyanna. Hello, Gabrielle. Oh, wow, this is amazing. Okay, let me start again. Hello, Kat. Hello, Quasi. Hello, Vanietta. Hello, Michaela. Hello, Kellyanna. Hello, Gabriel. Hello, Soha. Hello, Jasmine. Hi, Skyla. Hello, Veronica. Hello, Melanie. Hi, Crystal. Hey, Jesse. Hello, Harry. Oh, and sorry. Okay. Okay. Oh, hi, Lars. Who else? Okay, did I say Jazz? Hello, Jazz. Hello, Rahel. Hello. All right, is that it? Okay, I think that's hello. Great to see you all. Hello, Rahel. Yes. Hello. Um, okay. All right. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. Yes, I am. Thanks. I forgot. Yeah, I did really. Yeah, thanks. I'd forgotten about that. I really did fade at the end of last time. Why was that? But yes, I am. Thanks. Someone's here. But thank you for asking. Yeah, I forgot about that. I mean, right. Boy, someone's coming in, and but thank you. Now, one thing is last time maybe I was overwhelmed with guilt last time because it turned out I was very. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Um, wow, that's not even my son. So, okay. Maybe I felt bad last time because I was overwhelmed with guilt because unknowingly I had fallen sort of severely behind with grading your homework. It turned out that many of you had turned in homework 3 and even, I mean, homework 2, and many of you had turned in homework 3 and I hadn't done either. Now, hopefully, any and all of you, if you've done anything at all or everything that you've done until like a last couple of hours, hopefully you've gotten back. I mean, anything that any one of you has done, I believe now I've turned back, and I'm very pleased you all have done, and you're all very on top of what's going on here. Wait, and there's more people coming. Sorry. Um, I thought I really enjoyed our discussion last time about unthingy things. I think it really did go places, and we did reach the conclusion that was intended by the end. But I do want to go back to that conclusion and expand it a little bit today, a review. But it was a constructive discussion. It made me feel bad when I realized afterwards and saw everything you guys had brought to that discussion, like saw your homeworks again. Hopefully, point wise, you've now gotten the back and you got all the points and um, Wait, wait. He will talk. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, Kameza. First of all, good to see you. Second of all, yes, Jack is definitely getting a grade in this class, of course. We'll have to discuss. We might all get input into that. I don't know if he wants to get a better grade than the rest of us. That could be threatening. But we did have a dog in a lab one year in this class. It was it's kind of sad. Well, I won't get into that, but there was someone who had an assist dog in the lab forever, which was very strange to have an animal in the lab forever. But it was technically okay because it was an assist dog. I mean, it was like a needs dog, so it was technically okay, except that the sad thing is that I didn't notice it until like 2/3 of the way through the semester. Like there was a dog there the entire time, and I didn't even know it. I mean, that's kind of sad. And it wasn't Zoom. I mean, it was in the real lab. But yeah, that was bad. Yeah, I'm embarrassed. That dog did not get a grade. Yes, that's funny. Actually, it was a slide dog. Deba. What I want to do today, a couple of things. I actually want to address some of the things that you guys did put in the thingy thing homework. Like it is interesting. Oh, and also the homework number 2, which I know was sort of hard, or at least parts of it. I want to address some of those things. But first, let's just nail down. I did speak with Walters right after I spoke with you guys last week. Um, I think it's time to just nail down officially what a decision that I think we were verging towards last week. I want to just put this formally into Google Classroom and stuff. So I'm about to propose something. You're going to confirm or deny. Hold on. I'm going to just walk to my calendar for a second and check something out, and then you're going to confirm or deny. Right. Okay. What I'm going to now propose, I mean, there's what I'm going to propose, and of course I'm proposing it sort of strongly, but it can be modified by you guys. But what we'd like to propose is that we have a midterm exam April 12th. Okay, now again, I think I sort of explained more generally what this would mean last time, but let me just quickly remind you what this means to Walters and me. If we want to propose that there be a midterm exam April 12th. In this class, there is a midterm exam and a final exam. There aren't other exams or anything like that, and there's no, and the lab portion of the class is addressed in both those exams. Like both midterm exam and the final exam, you take, each one has a portion that is explicitly written by Walters to address what's going on explicitly in the lab portion, and you'll talk about that with him, blah, blah, blah. But in other words, you have two exams in this class. Each one comprises the lecture and lab components. If we propose a midterm exam for April 12th, I think that's what I just said, that whatever that Monday is, I think it's April 12th, then what that means to us, what that would mean is that the actual exam itself would be a take-home exam that would be posted like Thursday night, yeah, maybe either shortly after lab on Wednesday or the very next day, Thursday of the prior week, that is assumed to be safe, that you would have an exam be posted April 9th, sorry, 8th. I'm gonna actually take this calendar off the wall. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. So that would mean, yeah, April 8th, thank you. Yes, April 8th, we would post the actual exam on Thursday, April 8th. You would have the Friday and the full weekend to work on it at your own pace under whatever conditions you consider like favorable, including talking with each other. We'll address that, like we'll get to that. But we would post this exam on April 8th. You would have that duration to work on it. You would then submit it prior to class. Like you would submit it at 4:30 p.m. on Monday, and then we would have class. That's the sort of like downside, unfortunate part, I guess. Like, but you would be done with it, submit it, and you'd show up to class. And that's like your final responsibility to the exam is to submit it on time, a minute before class, and then show up to class. Like kind of the same way that if you were taking an exam in class, you would have to show up and take, right? So you do that, and but we would post it the Thursday before, and it would also mean that the week prior to that on April 1st or so, we would post a practice exam that then would be addressed and reviewed in lab portion with Walters the week prior. So that's what it means if we say that there's an exam April 12th. So all of this means that you don't have to do anything about it during spring break, but sort of like right at the end of spring break, I would post a practice exam that you would have for your perusal. Oh, and one last thing, and then I'm going to look. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's not. That's funny. I'm going to look at the chat in a second, but also let me make clear. I mean, because I'm actually not joking about this. I mean, it's easy to think this is serious what I'm talking about. And the practice exam is a real thing that we take very seriously. Like we think it is the way to study, the way to know what's on the exam, blah, blah, blah. But it is not something you turn in. Like, just to be clear, the actual exam is a take-home thing that you have time to work on and that you turn in via Google Classroom, and you turn in for an exam grade, and it is more serious than homeworks and stuff. Like it does get graded very seriously, blah, blah, blah. But the practice exam is totally the document that we all like work on together and like use to prepare and has solutions to it. So it's like, you know, the way you practice for SATs or whatever, but it is not something you turn in. It is not something you get credit for. It's just something you do. So in a minute, so we're going to confirm or deny this in a minute, but let me just look in the chat and see what. Right. Yeah. Okay. So on one day, wait. So I'm just going through the chat in order. April 8th, yes. On one day, I might not be understanding Skylar's question, or I might have already.
You put that we're like, what's the April 8th for?
Oh, the April 8th would be the day, and that's someone else's handwriting, but the April 8th would be the day that we would post the actual exam. If, like, in other words, we would put it in Google Classroom as the midterm exam, and it would look like just 100-point assignment. Like it would look, and then we would say it's due back to us right before class on the following Monday. So
Oh, okay. Because that's what I was saying one day too. Is it if you assign it to us the 8th, is it due by 4:30 on the 8th?
oh yeah, no, right. No, you get like 5 days to do it, or
Okay.
whatever. Like, yeah, it would be. So you have basically a long weekend to do it. Is the idea, right? And that's a very important question for everybody. And like again, I can get very detailed about this, but you could almost view our exam. I mean, as you get closer, you'll see it's almost more like a project or a portfolio or a report or a paper or an essay, if you like. Like it's more similar to that in a way, like a traditional project from another class, in the sense that the big mystery of the exam is not going to be like what questions are on it or what even are the answers to these questions. Like you won't. It's what you're going to show on the exam is the level to which you understand, all of you, you're going to show all your work on the exam and you're going to derive these results and you're going to show that you understand why certain solutions are the solutions to certain problems. Like we're not here to mystify, like you're not going to have a guessing game as to what problems are we going to put on, and you're not going to be in a competition over who can find those answers like on Chegg the fastest or something. Because to answer to Skylar's very good question, because yeah, we're going to give you a practice exam, and believe it or not, we're even going to give you solutions. We are going to give you what do you call it, an answer key to the practice exam. Like there might be a little thing here or there where we say deliberately, like we're not going to give you an answer to this. You all just have to figure this out and like do, good luck to you. We might, but then we'll be very clear if we do that. And then if we do that, then that exact question absolutely is both on the practice and the real thing. But like in the practice exam, for 97% of it, we will give you solutions. We will. And then we'll even be telling you that on your actual exam, you're basically going to do something extraordinarily similar to the practice, and you'll have time to do it. So in some ways, just to make it clear to everybody, like in some ways you could interpret, like the way we handle exams here, if you want to interpret in some way, it is like the biggest, it's a, how can I put this? Almost everything that you would normally think of as cheating, we're saying is allowed on our exams. Like that's the hook of how we do physics exams. For good or for bad, almost anything that you would ever consider, but possibly consider some extra way of like getting to a good grade on an exam, we're saying we're not turning a blind eye to that. We're not pretending it doesn't happen. We're saying it's legal. Like what I mean by that is you're going to get this exam posted on Thursday. Maybe I've already told you this. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but you'll get this exam posted on Thursday. You'll have 4 or 5 days or whatever to turn it in. We'll be expecting that you're talking to each other we'll be hoping that you're talking to each other during those 4 or 5 days. We'll be expecting that you'll be looking at our solution set to help you. We'll be expecting that you even go online and like seek out whatever Khan Academy or 3 brown, 1 blue, or hopefully not Chegg if you're smart, but whatever, you'll check out whatever online and have all those resources. And we're not saying you cannot. We're not checking up on you to say you cannot. In fact, you'd be foolish not to. What we're saying is that you guys do whatever you want to get through our exam, like consider it a take-home essay, and use resources such as the very answers that we will give you as guidelines of how to put. But then your job on the document you turn into us with your name on it is to show that every single thing that you've written down on that document, you actually understand. Like that's literally what you're showing us, not that you have possession of correct answers, but that the correct answers actually make sense in the universe and make sense to you. Like that's what you're actually showing in this exam, is that you get the stuff that we're trying to explain. And because that's the good and the bad. That's why there's 1,000 nice, comfortable, unstressful ways to get an A in this class, we hope. because it doesn't have to be a competition or a stress case, hide the ball kind of deal. But we also think why I'm saying all this, or why I can't get enough of saying it, it's like, it's not a trick. It's not to catch you. It's not to trick you. And it's not April Fool's trick, but it is a historical knowledge. I mean, an experience-based knowledge in my own life and Joe's life and et cetera, that there's something about physics that is just hard and real enough. Something about physics that is just enough, like an exercise in applying logic to the basic evidence of our senses, that somehow something about physics forces us to be truthful and logical and rational enough that to show that you actually get it is a worthy challenge. We don't have, in other words, you don't have to show us that you invented the answers to these problems, because you didn't, and neither did we. You have to show us, like we're trying to show you, like I'm trying to get you to see this. And the way hopefully you see it is by seeing that I see it. That's what you're going to show me right back on your exam. You're going to show me not the answers that I already know. You're going to show me that you get the answers. And you're going to do that by doing the same thing that pretty much all of you really have done in at least one homework. Like the good thing about the homeworks, whether you thought they were easy or hard, and whether they were all directly on the material of this test or not, they actually were. But the thing about the homeworks is, hopefully we've now had enough of an exchange of the homeworks that you guys can tell kind of, I hope, what I'm looking for or what gets me excited, or what sometimes I'll write more on your one slip of paper than you wrote on the paper of like, sometimes I'll write more excitement or whatever. Because we all know when you get what's going on, when you think the homework is easy or something, you go to town on it and you show, like with different colors or different diagrams or skipping lines or these little comments that some of you make. Like you'll say, like you'll even say sometimes, I don't understand this, or I don't agree with this. The more you can actually just reflect on or converse with your own solutions, the more you show that they are solutions that exist in your brain, not just on paper. That's what you all are going to show on the exam. The exam will not be hard. If you've been like, it's not meant to be unfairly hard or anything. It'll be easy if you get this stuff, but it's very easy not to get this stuff. Like if you're not paying attention to stuff. Anyway, I'm over talking it, but I want to say, especially those of you who've been turning in homework and stuff, and it's not too late. I mean, I think honestly, again, there are some of you who have never turned in homework 1 or 2. You kind of still do want to do that. It is not too late and you do want to do it. But any of you who've even turned in any of the game turns, and I also have to say something quick about that too, sorry. But those game turns, like if you've turned in any of them, you'll see it's like a 2-minute thing that it takes on your part. And then it's like 2 minutes back from me. But it's actually a super helpful exchange in us getting to know each other. Like I hope you guys have noticed that even in the scrap of paper you hand in, or the font you choose, or the 3 words that you remember that you said or something, like it's almost like that moment of you forcing yourself to remember 1 minute of class is half the exercise itself. And then, so it's, none of you have to like prove to me that you said what you said in class. And sometimes some of you are like apologizing. All I said was hello and goodbye, but I didn't. That's totally cool. You don't have to apologize for anything. It's half of the act of turning in that assignment is just the moment of self-reflection where you're like holding yourself accountable to like, what did I do in class today? Like, how much do I remember of it? And then you're just reporting to me that you had that self-reflection. And by me seeing that, I really do get to know a lot about you in the class. And by you seeing me return it to you, hopefully, and seeing that I'm giving you 50 points for that, hopefully you see what I'm looking for. And all of those little game turns, or the homework 1, homework 2, homework 3, they're just little symbolic exchanges of like what your exam should be like. Like you always make it clear to me what the question is. Make it clear to me that you do a bunch of work. Make it clear that you know what would constitute an answer to the question and box it. And like, even if you find at first that you're practically just copying down my solutions, you think in your mind, if you really want to make sure you're not copying, first, put it away and look and see what you could do without copying. But second, use different examples. Use, if I use MA and MB somewhere, change it to MX and MY, but say so. Like whatever you can mix up to show that you're flexible and actually getting the important things, it does that. All right, I'm talking way too much. I want to say one other thing quickly before we'll vote on this exam in a second. But I know that I was cleaning up Google Classroom and stuff last week, and so I uploaded some game turn. I ended up uploading some assignments that were backdated, and that could stress out and confuse people. Let me say again, when it comes to homeworks, it would take a lot for me to consider one of you late with the homework. Like I just take them when they come in, and like and especially the game turns, I date them all so that you can see that for every one class we have, there's a corresponding portal where whenever it occurs to you, you can remind me of something you said that day. So they're all just dated according, I know I've said this before, but they're all just dated according to our classes. So if sometimes I forget to put one out and then I put one into the stream and it says it was due last Monday, that's just saying this is the game term that corresponds to last Monday. And it still means it's still totally legal. If you remember that you said something, put it in. I'm sorry to be late with the portal, but you will not be considered late with the input to that portal. Like there's no lateness penalty on any of that kind of stuff. On exams, there is. You don't want to be late with an exam. So that said, if I'm, oh no, thank you. Oh, cool. Oh yeah. Sorry, no, those game turns are not. Oh cool. Oh cool. Okay, wait, let me catch up. Hold on a second. We get so yes, you'll get an answer key for the practice. Yes, that was good. I wish I. Okay, no, cool. I wish your midterms were like this too. And if this, good. Thank you. Okay, cool. Yeah. The game turns. We again, and it worries me too. I don't like. It makes me nervous. I don't mean to give you an assignment that was due last week. I'm not asking you to make a time machine and go back. But again, I just want it to be clear in the organization. I want you to know that you can hop on board at any time. I mean, I want to, classes, it's supposed to be like a good HBO series that like, yes, it's much better if you watch the HBO series from the beginning. Every show that you watch, you'll understand and appreciate in much greater depth if you've been following all the episodes from the beginning. But of course, the brilliance of HBO, I mean, big HBO shows, like whatever, like The Sopranos or like The Wire, or that wasn't whatever, these big HBO shows, like the brilliance of them is that you can tune in the middle of season 2 or Breaking Bad or something. You can tune in to season 2, episode 3. And even though you have no idea what's somehow the episode can still sit on its own and it's not too late for you to hop board. And then the idea is you watch a bunch and you like it. So then maybe you want to go back and watch the earlier episodes, but they can still hook you in it, right? I want you to believe that school can be like that too. You can enter and re-enter and be accepted as a citizen and as a student, as an A student at any time. In my opinion, it should never be too late. Like it should never be too late because it's ridiculous. So yeah, the game turns. If you remember that you said something 2 weeks ago, turn it in. Absolutely. Okay. Wait, yes, those are great shows. I do think those are great shows. Yes. Although Breaking Bad, I didn't make it through anyway. But yes. Blah, 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 blah. So what's all that? So therefore, okay. So that said, my proposal, I'm going to walk away for a second, but I just want to make sure you could consider this a vote or a confirmation, but I guess what I'm really asking is, because I know I now have Walters's approval coordination. I'm checking in with you guys as a group. If you look, like I'm making sure April 12th or that weekend or whatever, make sure right now that you don't all have some other chemistry exam or, some other major conflict. That's if you all did, or enough of you did, I'd want to know. I mean, I don't need to have 2 of your classes compete for your attention. But if not, if basically this seems like a reasonable plan, I'm going to walk away for a second. You talk amongst yourselves, but when I walk back in 2 minutes, I would sort of like a thumbs up or a thumbs down. We have to have an exam. Like, it's not an option to say we're not going to have an exam. But if enough of you said that April 12th is a problem, I certainly could hear April 19th or something like that. So I'm going to walk away for a second.
I prefer the 12th.
Wow. I love this. You guys really do give input. And can I say, oh, wow, look at this. Look at how you, sorry. Oh, wait. So I totally appreciate that all of you really do give input to these things. And oh, okay, cool. It does look like you have, yes. And let me remind you again though, as far as the game turns and stuff, every single one of you that put any input into this exam thing right now, that so counts. Really, you got to understand, like, we're not playing Boggle. It's not a competition of can you say something that no one else said. Like, I think school always feels that way to people, but no, like each one of you that even just said 12 sounds good, like that helps a lot, right? It all feels like we're all in this together. Like, please understand that if you put that in as a game turn, you don't have to apologize and say that that's all you said or anything. And you deserve the 50 points if you can, anyway. So I appreciate. So it sounds like, and the genetic thing worked itself out, or like, are you, oh no, that's consistent, the genetic thing. All right, cool. Right. Now I definitely don't want to compete with genetics. So if you're all saying the 12, okay. Now also, let me be clear. I do this because again, well, because it makes me feel better. But I'm not pretending this is a democracy, right? I mean, what I'm doing is taking all your input. It does look like the 12 works well for everybody. So we are going to say the 12th, and I will officially put it in the classroom. Like I'll just put an update in the stream that just says reminder, exam the 12th. Practice exam will be posted the 4th or whatever. Like I'll just put a reminder of all this so that you know before you go to spring break that this is happening. But there's nothing to do during spring break. But the other thing I want to say is it makes me feel better that everybody's kind of got a chance to think about it, but it's still not a democracy or what's the other, or a dictatorship. That is to say, if any of you still has an individual problem with this 12, right, and you're either being quiet because you're polite, or so, if any of you has an individual problem, you can still tell me or Walters individually. And if we have to work out an individual arrangement, we will. I mean, we have in the past and we will. Maybe this is flexible enough that that you're all fine. But again, like what we're working out here is what is the class structure. There are exceptions to many rules, right? And sometimes, and so flip side of that too, let's say as you get closer to the exam, I am trying to say, I am serious about the exam deadline. I'm very loose and generous about some things. I hope you would agree. But some things I'm not. Sometimes it's hard to predict. I will be grumbly and annoyed if let me be very clear. When the exam is due, that Monday, that 12th, you do want to turn it in time and you do want to show up to class. I've had the misfortune in my life a couple of times, 1 or 2 times, of being that student who had something like this that was going on and then like was still working to the last minute and freaking out for whatever reason. So then like kind of cut the class or like didn't show up to class for the first 45 minutes and then turned, I mean, in my day, it wasn't electronic, but like I came in late, slipped the exam in late, but I was that guy like once or twice where basically everybody else managed to show up to the exam on time or turn in the thing. And I was still taking the time during the class period to do the thing. Again, I'm admitting I've done that like once or twice as a student. It felt like garbage doing it. It's one of the reasons I remember doing it. It was not cool to do that. I'm not even saying that I got punished. I am saying that I knew I was letting down my classmates in a kind of raw way when I did that because they all, got it in on time and cut it off. And we all had work together too. Just like I'm saying to you guys, you can work together, you can help each other. But then at that final moment, come in on time and turn the thing in. Because if after working together and all, and after having like full web resources, you don't want to be that person that then takes an extra 45 minutes that nobody else took. Because like they'll know it, right? I mean, in Zoom and everything. And I'll know it in Google Classroom. And that I'll also say to be as clear as possible, as long as we're talking about it. Am I saying I will then light your exam on fire and refuse to grade it because you're like the devil? No. If you do something like that, I will still grade your exam. You still did your work and you'll still get a grade. I will have to take off points for doing that. Like, I don't think it would be fair if you got as high a grade as somebody else who cut out, right? But again, it's never too late. I'm not saying I'm just saying you would have to accept some penalty for that. Therefore, furthermore, what if during the weekend, all of a sudden, like you're going to the hospital or like your wife is going to that or something, like things come up, just communicate to me. if you start anticipating that there's going to be a reason that the exam's not going to come in late, this is where something I do care about. You can use my text, my phone number. I think I've given it to you. I'll give it again. If you anticipate a reason that this exam is not going to come in or that you're not going to be in class that day of April 12th, then just send me a heads up. Even if you don't think I'll buy the excuse, you don't have to tell me why, honestly. I mean, I don't want to overdwell this either, but things can come up that are not like my business to know or your responsibility to explain to me. But as long as you say in advance, as long as like that Saturday, you're like, Professor, things are happening in my family. I don't think this exam is going to come in on Monday or something. I mean, maybe it's better to ask than to tell, but you don't have to give me reasons. Just give me communication and awareness. Like, I think you all understand what I'm saying. And I'll listen. Everybody's individual situation is individual, especially during COVID, but just communicate while you go. It did happen like 2 semesters ago that like a couple of exams just like came in, like when they did, like 2 days later, no one explained anything, nobody apologized. And that you don't want to treat exams that lightly, especially like if we're making them this generous. Okay, I'm going to totally shut up. Okay, no, well, thank you for saying that. Okay, wait, I'm going to look at the chat again. Now that I just got my bad side out, maybe you're going to take back everything in the chat. Hold on a second. Oh, and how? Okay, but we are saying the 12th. Yeah, I'm saying we're saying the 12th. I'll put it in Google Classroom. I'm going to write it a second. Hold on. In case someone shows up. Sorry, one second. So I just put in the chat. I'm just making that. I mean, again, even though I'm stating this like official, well, yeah, right. Thank you for noticing that. Yeah, but correct me before I go any further. What I just wrote in the chat, that is what you think I'm saying, right? Like we are saying that, right? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So in fact, I'm just going to not even waste any more. I mean, I'm going to now just literally post that in Google Classroom right now, so it's official. If anybody's not showing up right now or whatever. And yeah, open universe. Right. Thank you for noticing. Like that is funny, but I do mean it. I literally mean that your exam is open, whatever. Like you're allowed to talk to friends. You're allowed to go on Khan Academy. You're allowed to look at your notes. You're encouraged to do all that. See, and you got to hear us again. Like, I know it sounds like we're being really nice, and in some ways we are, and there's reasons for that. But if you're looking for the catch or the hook is remember that we know that we're saying this. Remember that we understand that you will have that you'll be at a disadvantage if you don't try to use all your resources. So what you want to show us on the exam is what a person does, like when they have all their resources and they can put everything together to make the best possible demonstration of understanding that they can, right? You all get it, I think. Like if you just turn in a bunch of raw answers after all this, that would be a dumb way to turn in your exam, since it is open universe. But as far as talking to each other, secretly our total fantasy is that you all take the exam together. We could love nothing more than thinking that somehow, even in COVID, all of you were secretly in some like mask, like adorned caves somewhere, like with torchlights working out vaccines and answers to our exam. Like we would love that you would be thinking about physics that collectively. And I even have a funny story that's true about one semester when something like that happened. So you are not cheating if you work together. And if you don't work together, you're cheating yourselves in some ways. Just remember that when you're done, whatever you write down on the piece of paper and put your name to is your understanding. Not your original thought, but your understanding. Okay, wait, what a visual. Okay, all right, cool. Thank you. What a visual. Yeah, oh God, actually, that's funny. I hadn't thought of that. All right, now I'm going to put in Google Classroom, but I'm going to shut up for a second. but that's funny. And I'm also putting this in, frankly, I'm putting this in right now, also for the sake of Walters, so he can witness that we're establishing this right now and that it's all true. So hang on, sorry. Okay. Oh, that's it. April. There will be more updates of this kind. But I think there was other questions in the chat and I accidentally skipped like one question. So I'm going to look back in the chat now, but there was one question about like how many questions. Yeah, how many questions approximately? Very fair question. So there's the fast answer to how many questions on the exam is that the exam usually has two big parts, one part for lecture and one part for lab. So the lab part has an interesting format that he'll explain to you. And has to do with all the argumentation and the proving stuff that you do in lab. But the lecture part usually has like three big problems, kind of like homework sheets, like three big problems that are multi-parted. So a problem like has a fact pattern, a description, there's something swinging back and forth like this, and then there's part A, part B, part C, part D, and you usually have to find things in part E that were based on part D, that sort of thing. Usually we'll have like three big problems like that, each of which will go to many parts, maybe part like H for the lecture part. Like, in other words, it's not short. It's like three big problems that each go to part H, like, so 8 parts or so. However, again, the best answer to that question really is when you get the practice exam, and I don't mean this it's a legitimate question, but the coolest thing is in terms of like what equations do we need to know for the exam or what exact topics or how many questions, all of that is why we hand out a practice exam. And when you get the practice exam, you can rest assured, certainly when it comes to format and representation, like if our practice exam has 3 long questions that are going to part H, then your exam definitely is no longer than that and probably slightly shorter. Like your exam is usually like a large chunk taken from the practice exam. And then we've usually trimmed some fat or shed some layers that were stupid by the time you get to the real thing. But your thing, and format wise, equation sheet wise, anything like that, whatever's on the practice is what's on the real. Like it's meant to be like practice SATs to SATs, where by the time you get to our real exam, the only thing that you should be thinking about is some interesting physics implications. You should no longer be even worried about like wondering like what counts for what, or like what the structure or format or any of those strategies. Like, so, I mean, my deeper answer to the question is you'll see when you get the practice exam, but basically it's probably 3 long problems, each of which has 8 parts or something, and then the lab component. Okay, sorry. Wait. Oh, okay. So I'm going back to chat. Thank you, Skylar, for what you're saying about it's nice to be asked. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for saying, well, it's nice to be told that I'm being nice. I appreciate, but it's also better for me to ask you guys, but okay. Okay, what a visual. All right, so I think that's, okay. All right, So we're good on, oh, so I just put in Google Classroom what the deals with the exam. So there's, you'll start seeing updates and stuff as we get closer. I'll post the practice exam, then you'll see solutions will get posted progressively. And as I even wrote in the reminder, like what'll happen is you'll get the practice exam. You won't get solutions right away because, we want you to think about them. Then you'll get some kind of solutions or whatever, but the ultimate thing will be that Wednesday before the thing even gets posted. When you have lab with Walters, that will be like a review session where he will walk through solutions with you, like he will, and he'll answer questions and stuff. And so by that day, you'll have the last of whatever remaining solutions might still be outstanding or that we still wanted to challenge you with. You'll have like all your answers by the end of that Wednesday. That's deliberate. Right. And then the thing starts the next day. So, okay. Okay. Oh, and so as the practice, so corrections and updates and solutions and stuff will come out to the practice exam like progressively. So you just got your first update to that effect. Okay. I don't know. But part of if you guys think we're being nice at all, it does mean something to me. Like I'm glad if we're not adding more stress to your life. Part of the reason is, I mean, Joe and I are very different people in some ways, but we love doing this together. I can't tell you enough how much, on the one hand, I really love physics and want you guys to love it. Like, I think that physics is like, I mean, it keeps me going. On the other hand, I hate school. I mean, as much as you like exams stress me out so much as a student and lesser so as a professor. Like well, it's a whole other discussion, but I just don't get, I mean, what am I trying to say? Like every bit of physics that I now feel like I understand makes me so happy, but I didn't automatically understand any of it. Like I did take work, and sometimes it took enough work even without stress that to add stress to that, I don't even see what the point is. I mean, it's hard enough to, anyway, whatever. Yeah, if you guys find this a less stressful way to do it, good. And also just remember the flip side is somehow, no matter what we do, I mean, this is the thing about physics, no matter what we do to try to make it as helpful as possible, there is always like 10% of the room who just didn't show up enough to the room, whether it's a Zoom room or a real classroom. There's always like 10% of people that can't get it together to even like accept what we're trying to give as the keys to the kingdom. There's always enough people for whatever reason that just can't accept those keys, that they will get the bad grades that save the curve for the rest of us. And I've been those people just enough to know, right? I usually try to avoid being those people, but I have messed up enough in my life to know what it's like to be on the downside of the curve. And that's why I can say to you guys, what we're here to do is just work to not be on the downside of the curve. Like to not get an F is to get an A in a way. Okay. But funny story, just to put in perspective, or quick funny story, or just to shift gears or whatever. I don't know. Well, does any of you know Professor? Oh, sorry. Good. No, and I'll be happy. That's the thing. Just that's where the trick, whatever trick in this whole system is, there's some trick of the fact that the physics will still somehow find a way to beat people, like bite people in the butt and, startle them, whatever. But the not trick is, yes, if you all get A's, we are happy. Like if you all get A's legitimately and like actually know this physics, we are happy. You didn't rob us if you all get A's. Like that's important to know. But funny story on that, and then we'll get back to physics. Do any of you know Professor Wu? I guess you don't. You haven't had Professor Wu for anything, right? No. Okay. So he also teaches physics. He teaches physics labs, but he often teaches 2 or 3 labs and 2 or 4. So so you didn't have him, but he's a cool guy. He's like very different from Walters. He's from China. But he's now an American citizen. Amazing artist. Whatever. Great guy, Professor Wu. Hopefully you'll have the privilege of meeting him someday. Whatever. But many, many years ago, in a physics 204 class, it wasn't physics 102, but it was physics 204, and it was like 8 years ago. We were in the regular buildings. It wasn't COVID, obviously. It was summertime. We were taking physics 204 during the summer. And for some reason that summer, I was doing even this system. We had a final exam that was take home. I think it was partly so we could save class time because things were moving fast in summer. They had a take home final exam that was posted, and then they were all going to turn in to me on the whatever at the end, and they could all work together and all of that. So again, it wasn't a Zoom class, but it still had that same thing of that they could all work together. And I kept telling them that part of my fantasy was that they really would all help each other, and that they, but that I really was going to grade the thing seriously, and that blah, 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 blah. And it was a large class. So so more than usual, again, there was no COVID, so I guess it was easier for them to do this. It turns out that for this final exam in the summer of like 2014 or something, all of these students in this large summer lecture class, like at least 48 people, they all did get together. Pretty much, they all did get together and try to together. They divvied up all the problem parts and everything of the final exam, and they all like distributed, and they did it all together as one big group, and they shared everything. And I didn't know this at the time, but they all got together and they did everything, and they were really, and part, I think some of them were really trying to like get the best of me, like really, show me what a sucker I was for coming up with this system. And others of them were just taking me at my word, like, all right, let's just go to town, let's just get our A's, whatever. So they all worked together on this thing. Except I keep saying they all, that's an exaggeration. They didn't all, most of them did. All of them that knew each other and were friends and were like the cool kids did. But there was one person in the class whose English at the time was somewhat underdeveloped and somewhat broken. He wasn't as social or as outgoing as the rest of them for one reason, and maybe they knew each other from other classes for one reason or another. And again, I found this out later. All of them got together, except they didn't invite this one kid, and they all did the exam together except for this one kid. And I feel bad saying, and they all turned it in together. I mean, they all turned in their own copies, but they all turned in stuff, except this one kid turned in his own exam. Now, I didn't know this was all going on at the time. Again, I was hoping people would work together. But it turned out that they all, in their big group mentality, they all had a fundamental misunderstanding in one of the problems. And they all convinced themselves of this fundamental misunderstanding. And they all did one of them like very wrong. And they all did it together wrong. I mean, and they all shared in this thing. And there was nothing immoral or corrupt about that. But it was just like, they didn't then go back to their separate corners and think enough independently after having all of these discussions, I guess, like mob mentality took over. So all of them got this one thing very wrong, and all of them ended up getting like around an 83 or something on the exam, except for this one other kid that they didn't invite and they didn't work with. And you can see where the story is going. Of course, I would imagine this one other kid who did it himself, he got it all right and got a 99 on the exam, but the other, and that's punchline number one. And that doesn't prove anything. They didn't cheat. And that's why they all shared this with me later. No one did anything wrong, but it just shows you the limitation of this arrangement. Like, you still in the end want to only trust your own judgment after you've collected all of your resources and done whatever. It's you in the end with your piece of paper and your grade. But the other part of the punchline that you may already anticipate is that one kid that nobody invited and that actually did do the exam right. Someone said, well, can anybody guess? Can you tell the way the story is told who that? I mean, if this were like a movie, I would say that kid was me. No, that kid was not me. I was the professor of the class, but the kid was, does anybody know? Want to guess? Well, the kid did turn out to be
Professor Wu.
Exactly. Right. Right. Thank you very much for paying attention. Exactly. Like, I totally gave him a job the next year is basically what I'm saying. Because not literally for that reason. And all of this sort of unwound later. And people were treated him better later and stuff like that. But like, he totally has a job teaching physics now because he was that guy for whatever. Now, there's other stories I could tell you about Walters and stuff, but like, it all goes to show you, we mean the system. We will never, ever like insult someone for using someone else for help. I couldn't have gotten through college physics without my friends and my lab partners but we helped each other. At the end, it's still us standing, blah, blah, blah. All right. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, the professor. Exactly. Professor Wu. Now, well, Professor Walters, I got a whole different stories about, but all right. Oh, speaking of Professor Walters, well, no, we're not speaking of Professor Walters. Before I go further, I want to go back to your fascinating discussion okay, if we're done on the exam, sorry to talk so much. If we're now going back to, I'm shifting gears. I'm going to catch my breath for a second. I want to go back to the thingy thing stuff from last week. I loved your discussion on it, but now I've read your homework. So there were some really interesting things in the homeworks that I want to comment on as well. So hold on a second. sorry. Okay, let me, and again, and by the way, I'm shifting gears now. I'm taking a little breath. I've been babbling a lot. If I am going to shift gears, but if there's any questions at all still that pop up in your head about the upcoming exam or about grades or anything, you could still ask. Like I'm just shifting gears because I am, but feel free to ask any questions in the chat or whatever. And shortly or at some point, I will want to hear where you are in lab with Walters and stuff like that. But because I was impressed with both the discussion and what you guys wrote in the homework, and because also I feel like I sort of raced the conclusion of the discussion at the end, I want to back up a little bit on like why we do this unthingy thing silliness. I mean, it seems a little bit silly, but okay. So first of all, we're ultimately trying to distinguish here between thingy things and unthingy things. Like obviously that's casual terminology, but we are trying to get at a very, very real distinction. So from here on, things that we call thingy, or things that would otherwise maybe be denoted as material, tangible, palpable, massive, particular, discrete, countable. I mean, these are all very similar, very related words. And I'll say them again, like countable, material, tangible, palpable, massive, particular, discrete. Any of these words ultimately is number one, what I'm trying to connote when I say a thingy thing. I mean something that seems like solid and something that seems like that you can touch it, right? But the technical word for that from here on, and it is a technical, I mean, the heavy kind of category that embodies that from here on is particle. Now, of course, you've heard of particles your whole science life. Like I know that. I mean, I know you've heard of particles in chemistry and stuff, but there's kind of different uses of that word. Like, first of all, sometimes particle makes people think of a very, very, very small amount of matter. That doesn't have to be what particle has to mean. I mean, it can mean that. But strictly speaking, in the way we're going to speak of physics, like a planet can be a particle, or more specifically, the motion of a planet is what we would describe as particle type motion, as opposed to, say, wave motion or some other kind that we really care about in this class. So particle, and I asked like, what was your definition of a particle? I just asked as a thought question in the homework, and after you had done a couple of funny exercises, and there was no like right or wrong answer. Of course, I can't take off points for you. I mean, but I was asking your opinion sort of based on what you were doing. And many of you were really, all of you actually really showed that you were paying attention to the exercise. When you tried to define particle, you definitely like used concepts and words that had been emerging through the homework. And I totally noticed that. But I could also, let me point out what's like not obvious. So a lot of you said things like a particle is something that occupies a small bit of space in a small bit of time, or something, which is cool. I mean, that is a cool idea for definition. Or some of you said like a particle occupies one space at one time, or something, also very good. Or a particle is something that occupies space and time. Okay, now, and in fact, a lot of you said something like that, like a particle is something that occupies space and time. Now, here's where I want to be a little bit more slow and careful than I was last class. Like, we're on to something if we say that a particle occupies space and time. But the first thing I kind of want to bring to everybody's attention, when we were trying to say in the homework in a way, is like, everything in physics is in space and time. Physics is about the study of stuff moving through space and time. So if we study something at all in physics, it better occupy space and time, right? And that doesn't mean anybody's answer is wrong. But for starters, anything I study in physics better occupy space and time. Now, it might even be true that anything I study in life occupies space and time. Like, I'm not sure what arena there is in the universe besides space or time. I'm not saying there is one or isn't one, But in the material empirical world of the universe, like there's space and time. And I could even be willing to believe if someone wanted to say to me, well, everything occupies space and time, like everything lives in space and time. If even someone wanted to say to me, like, love, dude, like love lives in space and time. You might not know how, but so someone could say to me, like, like you used to love your high school girlfriend, and then in college when you broke up, you didn't love her anymore. So love existed in time. Like I'm not, again, we could have a whole discussion. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just saying I could see someone saying that, right? But then I'm going to say, okay, before we get too crazy, like there are a lot of abstract things that aren't tangible that probably exist in space and time and might be even more important than anything I could ever say in a physics class. But the thing about love or justice is that even if they live in space and time somehow, even if they occupy space and time, what I don't at this point know how to do is measure their occupation of space and time. And that's a really important distinction. Like I could say I have a lot of love. Some days I have little love, other days maybe. Or I could say there's a lot of justice in Bed-Stuy, but not a lot of justice in Crown Heights. Like maybe I could say that. But I really don't think that I can quantifiably measure any of that with any reproducibility or reliability. Like I think that I'd be lying if I was like, yeah, there's 32.5 units of love on Kingston Avenue at like 4:00. Like what? Like so what am I saying all that about? I'm saying, so for starters, if something even makes it through the gate of being part of physics, what that already means is we think that if something is going to be discussed or analyzed or predicted in physics at all, that means we think it occupies space and time in a measurable way. That is a first and foremost prerequisite of anything that we study in physics. It's got to occupy space and time in a measurable way, a quantifiable, reproducibly quantifiable way. Now that's anything in physics. But now, now I'm going to say, we did these like weird activities for like an hour and a half last week. And we found that 2 of those 5 activities were kind of harder than the other 3. And I'm calling those number 3 and number 5. Like, I'm calling them constraints, number 3 and number 5. Like, and that was a discussion, everything, but we got to this point where oh, sorry. Okay, and I know we said this last time. I'm not pretending I'm saying something new, but I just do want to say it as clearly as possible. Wait, I'm looking in the chat. Sorry. Huh. That's funny. Oh, okay. Wait, for which quit? Okay, that's funny. Okay, I'm gonna keep this to myself. The thing in the chat is funny, but I think I don't get it. Okay. And fair enough. Yeah, this is it's almost an unfairly crazy question. So this maybe is why I'm like dwelling on it now. Like, here's the thing. If those of us who were in class last week, I mean, which obviously is us, like the basic intuitive, like, duh, like, oh, he's just asking this, he's not asking anything deeper level of that you can't have like one potato chip, you can't have like one stapler be over here while it's also at the exact same time over there. Like, in other words, task number 3. And you can't have a stapler and a pencil literally, or you can't have the center of a staple literally at the same point in space at the same point in time as the center of some pencil, right? This basic, like, again, remember, I mean, it's sort of obvious. Oh, you can't have one thing at 2 places at the same time. Like, duh, like that's all you're looking for, Yaverbaum. But remember, as obvious as that is, because we experience it all the time, that we can't have one thing at 2 places at the same time, as obvious as that may seem, what we totally can have is one thing at 2 times at the same place. Like, right? I mean, let me just remind you of that. Like, we couldn't do task 3, but we could do task 2. And it took a while to even sort that out because the wording seems so awkward and unusual because we just changed one word. But let me just say it again. It's like a basic truism that we all accept, that a thing can't be at, sorry, we all accept this truism. We're just used to the idea that a thing cannot be in 2 points in space at 1 point in time. We accept that a pencil cannot be in my house and your house right now. We all accept that. But please remember, a pencil can be in my house right now and tomorrow. That's not a contradiction. Like, a thing can be in 2 times at the same space, but it cannot be at 2 spaces at the same time. So already there's something going on with that relationship we were saying last Wednesday. But then also we have this idea that, okay, 2 things cannot be at 1 point in space at 1 point in time. Again, everybody might very reasonably be like, yeah, we know that. Like, we know that. We don't need a whole physics class to tell us that like a pencil and a stapler can't be at the same place at the same time. Like, thank you, Yaverbaum. And you also might all say like, and yes, that was a fascinating discussion with Lars and everything, but we also all know that you could have an ice cube in a glass, but that doesn't count as having an ice cube like in a solid glass. Like, I know that you all know everything that we said last week. But to me, the kicker, it's all interesting to say that. It's interesting to say that a particle is something that cannot be in 2 places at the same time and cannot share the same time at the same place with some other particle. The reason it's interesting to me to say, and I know I've said this, but the reason it's interesting to me to say is that there's a whole bunch of entities in physics that are not particles, but are still in physics, right? The whole reason I want to dwell on what particles are is to like drum home the point that not everything in physics is a particle. In fact, I think that's what I wrote on a lot of your homeworks. When a lot of you wrote something like a particle is something that occupies a bit of space at a bit of time. Even those of you who wrote a particle is something that occupies a really small amount of space at a really small amount of time or something like that. Or even if you went all the way and wrote something like a particle is something that occupies one space at one time. If you even write that, it would lead me to believe, okay, then I guess like particle just means like the smallest amount of stuff like that everything is made of. Like everything is a particle then. In fact, I sort of get that message from chemistry. Like, okay, everything is made up of smaller parts and smaller parts are made of smaller parts still. And the smallest possible part of all smallest parts is a particle. So I guess everything is a particle. Like that's the message I would take away from a chemistry class. I probably did take away that message. And that's the message I would take away from a lot of homework assignments if I take them too casually, that what we're all kind of saying is particle is the smallest like element of everything. But I'm here to say, no, it isn't. Like there's a whole, in other words, I'm here to say, so a particle, wait, so what I'm trying to say, oh, and sorry, I'm getting myself all crazy here. Hold on, I will pause. I'm saying, oh, we're about to be interrupted. Sorry, just by our friend, you know, who, hold on 1 second. Yes. In 1 hour, in 1 hour, in 1 hour and 20 minutes, in about 80 minutes, maybe a little bit earlier if I don't get interrupted. I'm almost, well, it's good to see you.
Thank you.
to do
Is this the class?
Yes,
Oh,
I'll,
wait.
yeah, I'll ask them again. You can.
If they did, can they trade with me?
Yes, I'll ask them if they did. They definitely will if they did.
But if they did, will they trade with me?
If they did, then they will. I
I
know.
have a good Pokemon in mind.
Do you want to tell me or should I?
Well, I think I do.
Okay, let me teach them and I'll ask them. And then,
Okay,
good job.
we're at the end or right now?
At the end, I'll ask.
Rapper for change.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's your change,
Okay,
Dad.
thank you very much. Okay.
Mom?
Okay. Okay. Wait, I'm just gonna get my head. I'm not even gonna look at the chat for a second. Now I'm in trouble with his mother, of course, because I just gave him a Kit Kat. Okay. Oh my God. All right. So one thing I'm trying to say is the objects that, and I will look in the chat in a second, but the objects that cannot obey, that cannot violate constraint number 3 and cannot violate constraint number 5, like those objects are what we call particles in physics. And the key thing to understand is that not everything in physics is a particle. But before I forget, like the black and the red on the screen here, I'm going to call them constraint number 3 and constraint number 5 for the rest of this class, because I think it was a memorable discussion. I think you'll know what I mean, but that's just what we call them in this class, just so that you know some science. Like constraint number 3, the idea that you can't occupy 2 spaces at once, that a particle is a thing that cannot be in 2 places at once. That's technically called locality or localization. That is a property that particles have, that they can be said to be in a certain place at a certain time. And the fact that you can't have 2 particles occupy the same state technically at the same time, that you may know from chemistry as the Pauli exclusion principle. That's that whole idea when you're doing electron orbitals and all of that, and you're figuring the inner orbital, the suborbitals and the shells and stuff, the whole idea that at most you could have 2 electrons in one energy level at the same time. And even those 2, you can only have 2 because technically one is spin up and one is spin down, like none of which is really ever clarified in chemistry classes or physics classes. But that whole idea is called the Pauli exclusion principle, that 2 particles cannot occupy the same state at the same time. What I'm going to look at the chat in a second. I'm going to take a breath, but all of this is to say, okay, just to be as clear as possible, and then I will look at the chat. Particles, so we're all about motion, things moving through space and time. When particles move through space and time, we call their motion a trajectory. A trajectory is just a fancy word for a path. But the specific implication when we say that a particle has a trajectory, what we're kind of getting at or assuming about a particle is that if a particle goes from here to there, if it goes from location A to location B, that means at one point in time it occupied location A and nothing else no other particle in the world did, because it's a particle. At another point in time, it occupied point B, and at that point, nothing else did. And it implies that when it occupied point B was a different time from when it occupied point A, because it's a particle. And furthermore, that if it got from point A to point B, if it's a particle, We talk about its trajectory from point A to point B because what we're believing is it traveled in the conventional sense from point A to point B, meaning at any given moment, if it wasn't at A and it wasn't at B, it was at some location in between and nothing else was at that location. And it was only at one unique moment of time that it was at that location, right? It's all like very obvious in a way, except that not everything does this, right? And again, I will look at the chat before. Like this is all in contrast to oh, sorry. You can still leave that, but okay. Again, I will take a pause and I will look in the chat. I think I just want, because I think I do know where you're starting to be at in the labs, or I certainly know where the curriculum starts to go at this point in labs. I'm making this big deal about particles and how particles move, or what we call the motion or the trajectory of a particle, because I want to contrast it with this other huge type of motion that occurs in physics, occurs in the physical world. That's really what the purpose of this class is about, and what you're really now starting to look at in lab. We want to look at motions in the world that are abstract, that are intangible, that are immaterial. Really, like, I mean, this is where things get really fascinating, at least for me, from my point of view, is that there's motions through the world that are not particle motions, but motions that, or motions or phenomena or behaviors that absolutely, that absolutely meet our standards of science or physics. Like there are entities that do occupy space and time in a measurable way, but not in a way that is constrained by locality or nor the Pauli exclusion principle. Like that's what we're getting at here, right? There is some motions in physics are like the trajectory of a particle, but other motions in physics, for big example, the example that we're coming to here, are not the trajectory of a particle. They would be more like the propagation of a wave pulse. That's what you're starting to look at. I hope I'm going to find out in a couple of minutes. What you're starting to look at in lab is the propagation of a wave pulse. Okay. And again, I apologize. I know I did kind of say this at the end last time, but I really feel I can't say this enough. And I'm also going to post a link in a second to a video that is on this that I made a long time ago. That's sort of interesting, maybe. But what I'm trying to say now is, in general, there's a whole category of things that I'm going to call from now on, and that we call in this class the flow of information. That is in fact, okay, no, let me say that. Sorry, I just have to vomit all this out before. It's like early. This is all early onset Alzheimer's or late onset ADHD. Same thing. I mean, yeah. Yep, and they're just happening because I just forgot. Oh yes. That was too bold. I Okay, I'm writing this list of red things to try to get across why we call this whole how much is encompassed by this phrase flow of information. It's kind of a cheesy phrase maybe, but I actually think it's the most powerful, accurate phrase we can use. In other words, particle as opposed to what? Particle as opposed to information. Some people would say, I mean, you've heard before in your life and in your life as a scientist, you may have heard of particle versus wave, or maybe you've heard particle versus energy or something like that. What I'm here to say is like, those are not wrong. Like we are distinguishing particle against wave or something, but waves and energy and all these other things, first of all, can be just as confusing terms as the term particle. Like just because we use those words doesn't mean we know what they mean. But second of all, they're all different subcategories. They're all waves, energy, gradients, seismic shifts. These are all just different versions of one larger umbrella phenomena, which is a way in which things can move from here to there without there being anything moving from here to there. Like any one of these examples, heat flow, sound flow, light flow, which I didn't even write down. Well, I sort of did when I wrote electromagnetic radiation. I circled the ones that are really big in this class. In this class, we're going to talk a lot about sound waves. We're going to talk a lot about water waves. We're going to talk about electrical current, electrostatic fields, magnetic fields, electromagnetic radiation. We're not going to talk as much about seismic shifts or thermal climbs or anything. But whatever we call any of these things, whether you call them energy or wave or radiation, what they are flows. What this class is ultimately about is flow, and a flow is different from a trajectory. Again, I know I keep forgetting the chat. I will look in the chat in a second, but I guess what I'm going to pause on is a flow is different from a trajectory. A flow is a type of motion that does violate the Pauli exclusion principle. There can be, thank you so much, thank you. there can be two flows at the same place at the same time. Like one river can flow into another, and it doesn't, and this first river won't knock the second river out of alignment and cause it to like run away. They'll just blend. Or one red light can shine. I mean, we said this last time. A red light can shine on the same spot as a blue light, or I can shout in your ear the same time someone else shouts in your ear. Flows can flow through each other and into each other and intersect each other and share. And not only that, flows are flows. If a river is flowing, you cannot say the river is over here right now. Like there's a whole river flow, right? So we're here in this class actually ultimately to look at flows. First, mechanical flows like wave through water flows, then ultimately the flow of sound. I mean, not ultimately, but then later the flow of sound, then the flow of electricity, which is a whole different kind of flow. It's not a wave, it's called a current. Like that's a different thing, right? But it's a flow. It's not a path. And an electrical current is not a thing. It is the motion of things, blah, blah, blah. So that's what we're trying to look at here. And finally, I guess I just want to say, and then I'm going to look in the chat, I'm really going to shut up. Oh yeah, so I want to say, if you ever hear the word propagation, like in lab, maybe you've heard it yet, or if I start using it, when I use the word propagation, okay, just to get some vocabulary down, and then I'm going to stop and look at the chat. Like whenever you hear the word propagate from now on in a physics class, it just does mean move, but it's the word that we use when what we're talking about moving is not a particle. Whenever a wave moves or a pulse is a piece of a wave. When something moves in a non-particle or non-trajectory fashion, we call that propagation. It's just the word to signal that what we're talking about moving is something immaterial. Okay, sorry, someone has to be let in, sorry. And I know there's a million chat things I've totally ignored. Hang on one second, I'm sorry. I know I'm saying nothing too. Okay. All right, okay, oh, right, oh, yes. And I feel like, and of course, Kit Kats, right, I get that, that makes sense. Yes, I should have actually seen that coming. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna take a breath for a second. 5, 6. Okay. I probably didn't really need to say all of that. But I think, yeah, all right. Maybe that was all very redundant from last week, but that's just my clarification of last week. Let me now turn it to you guys and ask what happened in lab last week. I mean, I think I know, but bring me up to speed with like what was the most recent motion in lab, or what happened in, and you could do it in the chat, or you could talk. You could also stand up and stretch, whatever. I might stand up and stretch, but I'm gonna shifting gears again. Oh, I'm sorry. And I know I should talk about your homework number 2. I know that was challenging to many people. And I think also a lot of people got a 49 instead of a 50. You can get that point back sooner. You'll remind me. I'll explain why a lot of people got a 49. And once I explain it and you all get it, then you'll just return it in and you can get the point back if you care. It's almost just to the reason that a lot of people got a 49 was almost just to force you to ask me to remember. I do want to go over that homework, or at least the first question at some point. I'm just saying. But for now, right now, we're taking a pause and I'm asking, and you could all take a breath or you could stand up and stretch. But if anybody could fill me in on their opinions or their memory or a screenshot or anything about lab last Wednesday, that would be fantastic. perfect, Ollie. Because I think it's related to what I'm saying right now. I think. Happy spring, by the way, everybody. Also. Oh, chat. Okay. Oh, great. Oh, yes. If you can, that'd be great. I'll even turn off. I'll turn off my screen. That would be great. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Okay. In fact, thank you very much. Let me look at this. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, good heavens. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And what? Okay, great, great, great. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is not, this is, okay, motion 5B. Right. And I remember this. And if I'm correct, Kat or anybody else, this, what Kat is showing me right now, this was, if do I remember correctly, it's 5B because you actually were looking at essentially this for 2 weeks in a row, partly because it's like hard and confusing. But is that right? It's called 5B because something about this was taking 2 weeks. Is that right? Wait. Oh yeah, it's continuing this way. Okay. Right. I will let you know if you should scroll. Then it's a part 3. Oh, it's a 3-part. Oh, right. Oh, wait. Okay, it had 2 parts already, and part 3 is this week. Okay, yeah, this is not easy, right? This okay, it's actually okay. There's a lot going on in this lab, but one thing, or a lot going on in these 3 weeks, and I'm going to use. Wait, wow, you already have the phase shift and everything. Okay, that's great. No, yes, there's a lot going on here. The first, I'm going to look one more time, and then I'm going to say I'm going to start using the screen. This is very helpful, Kat. Thank you. Let me just see why. Yeah, wow. Right. Okay. Thank you for showing me that. I'm going to take back the screen now. Thank you very much. This, right. The first thing I want to say is, okay, there is a lot going on in motion 5 in this lab. Really, there is a lot. And some of my most interesting and engaged discussions with Walters over the years have been about like this lab. So there's a lot of layers, and it's okay if at certain moments any of you feels like you don't get all of it. Like there's a lot behind, and obviously you can see you're doing it for 3 parts. I mean, for 3 weeks. But let me just start. We'll break it down. Let me on one level. Like the first thing is, this is the first set of labs you're doing where you're actually looking at a pulse travel from one place to another rather than a particle. Like that's sort of obvious, but it's sort of not. Like, but this is we are now looking at waves, right? And you're trying to come to a lot of detailed understanding about these waves, but let's just first look at the big picture here. Like you are looking at a wave pulse travel from one location to another. The reason I know that you are, or the reason I can say that is not like a mathematical one. I want to make clear this. Okay, the first thing that I want to say as clearly as I can, even if in some ways I'm saying it over and over again, is what, like, if assuming if you picture the most simple wave pulse you can, like, don't picture all the details of your lab, just picture the basic scenario, whatever either video you were looking at or what, and of course it sort of changes every year and it changes in COVID, but or if you didn't even like the lab or whatever, if you just pictured me and you standing on opposite ends of our room or of the lab room or whatever, and you picture us holding a really long string or a really long spring, as might be the case in this lab. If we're picturing this long continuous medium, this one-dimensional stretched item, and I flick my end, like, again, like hopefully more or less this is what you're picturing when you do the various versions of Lab 3. If I flick my end and I send this little bump or this crest or this trough or this disturbance or this like middle misshapen hump of string, whatever, down to you, if hopefully you can picture that, or hopefully that's what you are picturing, or an old-fashioned telephone wire, and I just like flick the telephone wire and then a bump goes along the telephone wire, or we have two Dixie cups and a string between them and I flick the string. If you can picture that bump, that crest or that trough, that that disturbance, that oddly shaped bit of the string that travels from me to you, we're calling that a pulse. That's a wave pulse. And the important thing to realize when you're picturing that wave pulse, before you get into any other mathematical details, realize that the pulse that you're seeing travel from me to you, realize that you are seeing a travel. First of all, if a pulse travels from me to you, there most definitely is a motion that is occurring through space and time that is measurable and reproducible, right? Like literally we could stand on opposite ends of this long string. We can know that the string is 5 meters long. Like I'm standing 5 meters away from you, and I could go flick, and flick my string. So this little bump, this little crest or crest trough pair or whatever, this little hump goes traveling down to you, and we can all set a stopwatch. And again, maybe you sort of did this in your lab simulations, but even in the simplest level, if I send a bump to you and I know that the thing is 5 meters long and I have a stopwatch, so I know it takes 3 seconds to get to you, like that's a motion that is measurable and reproducible. And you could even like do math and say, oh, it went 5 meters in 3 seconds. So it's going 1.67 meters per second or whatever. So I therefore predict that if I had to travel 10 meters, it might take 6 seconds. Like you can do all of our regular physics on this little bump that you picture, that you see traveling from me to you. And that little bump that you see traveling, we're going to call a pulse. And a pulse is like a package of motion that has all the properties of normal physics motion. And in this case, that motion would be entirely consisting of string, right? If I'm holding string and you're holding string and I flick my end of the string and it bumps along down to you, then the only motion that we're observing consists of little molecules or bits of string, right? But here's the kicker again, even if it's totally obvious on one hand, like to me, it's not on the other hand, which is this: we all observe a measurable, reproducible, quantifiable motion through space and time, and the motion consists entirely of little bits of string. And we observe this measurable motion through space and time from point A, me, to point B, you. And this entire motion consists only of bits of string, like going up and down or whatever in this long piece of string. Yet, the key important point that even if I'm taking 3 hours to say, the key important point is no string went from me to you. Let me say that again. Like when we send a wave pulse along a string from me to you, we definitely sent something that is real, that is measurable. Like if I flick a string and send a pulse along the string from me to you, then there's a motion from me to you that is measurable and reproducible, and in other words, scientific, and in other words, real, right? And that motion consists only of string. Like there's nothing else going on here besides me flicking string, right? Yet there is not one piece of string anywhere in the universe that you can say moved from me to you. This is the essence of pulse propagation. This is the essence of wave motion, which is so fascinating that we can even study it at all. Honestly, I think like literally wave motion from me to you means a motion that actually occurred from me to you, yet for which there is no thing that did that motion at all. Like if a wave pulse travels along a string from me to you, then motion occurred and it consisted only of string, and yet we cannot find any string at all that went from me to you. And by the way, we cannot find any string at all that went from me to you. That's weird. Like that is to me interesting that we could be dealing with motions of stuff where the stuff isn't actually doing that motion. Why do I keep saying that? Or like what? I mean, because again, with the string or whatever you're doing in the lab, whatever you're simulating, a bit of string over on my end goes up and then comes down. Then a piece of string next to it goes up and then goes down. And then a piece of, up and then goes down. So all these bits of string are moving, and together they're all moving in some very complicated pattern that you're trying to study and figure out in the lab. But whatever that pattern is a very complicated pattern. In the end of the day, we get a pulse that goes from me to you, and it consists only of string, yet there's no string that goes from me to you. This is this is why we call that thing a pulse, because it's not actually a thing, right? What it is a disturbance in the shape of the string. What we're observing move is, well, just that, a disturbance in the shape of the string. And a disturbance in shape is not a thing, right? I mean, like if I have a cup on my desk and I break its shape, I broke it. I didn't like create a new, well, I don't even know what I'm saying with that, but all right, let me look in the chat for a second. So that's fine. Okay, actually, no. Well, yes and no. I'm not yes and no, but I'll say no. I mean, I'll get back. That is a good. I'll get back to that. String theory. I will get back to that. Remind me. Okay. But you're doing something more specific than this, even in the lab. So let's get to that in a second. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'll go back to that page in a second if anybody wants me to. I just write this before I forget. Let me, wait, I'm going to take a break for a second. Okay, sorry. I know why. It's class always makes me hungry. Okay. The thing I just wrote on the board. Is this familiar at all? Have I ever written anything quite like this before in this, or have you seen this with Walters or with me? Let me ask actually a different, wait a minute. Does anybody know what I mean if I say this? Okay, I'm going to look in the chat because what I'm saying right now is either really old news to you or really new news. I mean, I don't even remember. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, yeah. Okay, good. Right. Definitely, this is where homework 2. This was part of homework 2, and this is also why homework 2 was hard for people. I realized, right? Because I don't know what I've said about this or what I haven't. That's right. This was on homework 2. That's good. But is that the only? And I'm asking honestly now, though. And I will try to re-explain homework 2 or stuff, but have I ever said anything like this in this class or did Walters in the lab? Like, or I mean, do you know what I mean by specifically this right here? Does this mean anything to anybody? Or could anybody explain? The thing I just circled in red. And this is a real question. So actually, let me ask you, what, I'm just curious. It's not a requirement. I mean, I know what's required for this class and what's not, but just out of curiosity, could you put in either in the chat or could all of you electronically signify if you have whether or not you liked it, whether or not you think you remember it or whatever, but just electronically signify if you have taken any calculus, like in college. Yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, awesome. 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 Wow. Okay. Wow. That's great. Okay. Because I know it's all a very strange thing that technically now you're not, wait. Yeah, I know you're not required to this class, but you all have. Okay. You cried to it? Okay. So is it familiar without like ramming too much of it down your throat or anything, or like asking this thing that I put in red here is my way of saying you might be familiar that velocity, instantaneous velocity is the first derivative of position with respect to time, right? Or put another way, this might help slightly more like, and please do, I guess writing this down, this is technically what I'm doing here is like physics 1 in its relation to calculus. So this might be a refresher for some of you, it might be a totally new way of looking at things, it might be, I'm not expecting anybody knows anything, I'm just trying to explain things right now. I'm saying this. In fact, here, wait, I'll make this even clearer. Hold on. What just happened? Oh, sorry. Wait. It's supposed to be next, not a video. Sorry. I'll just leave this. Okay. Okay. Here, there's a quick perspective. I'm trying to say, oh wait, well, I'm trying to say, I'm trying to connect for a moment physics to calculus here. And for some people, using the calculus helps them understand the physics better. For some people, using the physics helps them understand the calculus better. So there's no prerequisites for anything. Like it could just as easily be, for my money, a world would be a good place if people were required to take physics before they took calculus classes. That could be just as likely as helpful as requiring people to take calculus classes before they take physics. But it's two different languages for the same idea. And the idea here that I want to get at right now, to start relating to these cosines and these phase constants and everything that you have going on in lab 5, what I want to get at here is average velocity is the slope of the line connecting any 2 points on a position time graph. Like if you just look at this little sketch graph that I have, this, if you imagine position as a function of time, if you imagine some particle having a trajectory through the world, like time is ticking and some particle is moving in some kind of a way throughout the world, like throughout the one-dimensional space of the world. Like I only have one axis charting X here, that refers to one dimension of space. But if I imagine some particle moving through space, and every moment of time that ticks on, I ask myself, where in space is this particle? And I put down a table of values. And from that, I make a scatter plot. Now I have the scatter plot, this graph that's showing where this particle is moving through space. If I pick any two random points on this graph, if I pick any two random points on this XT graph, on this position time graph, then my two random points are like X1 comma T1 over here and X2 comma T2 over there, right? That's just like on a random graph in math class having X1, Y1 and X2, Y2. But here we're putting time on the Y-axis. Now, if I look at any two random points on this XT graph, right, and I draw the line between those 2 points, the slope of that line is the rise over the run, i.e. the change in X values over the change in t values. I mean, in a math class, it'd be y values over x values because you have a yx graph. Here we have an xt graph. All the same rules apply. So the slope of the dotted line connecting those 2 points, the slope of that line would be the change in x values, like the rise over the run. So x2 minus x1 over t2 minus t1. And t1 we always call 0 in physics, like wherever you start paying attention, that's when you start the stopwatch. So that's always called 0. So what I'm saying with all this right now, this is all a big sort of background or digression or reflection or whatever, but I'm saying that any random particle moves through the world, if you draw the dotted line connecting connecting 2 points of its travel, the slope of that dotted line will be the average velocity of the particle. That's what I'm trying to say right now for the moment. So I'm going to say that really as clearly as I can. The average velocity of a particle is the slope I always, whenever I read the most important things, what I wrote here, maybe I'll write it again on the next page, is I'm saying the average velocity of a particle between any 2 points in space and time. Like we're looking at this particle between point 1 and point 2. The average velocity of this particle is the slope of the dotted line that's drawn straight between the 2 endpoints of this motion. The slope of that dotted straight line is the average velocity of this particle's motion between point 1 and point 2. But what I'm trying to emphasize by saying that right now is that's the average velocity of the particle. It's the slope of that dotted straight line connecting the 2 endpoints of its motion. But please notice, as I'm trying to represent in the graph here and in this explanation, the dotted line is not actually the trajectory of the particle. Like the particle didn't move along that dotted line. The particle did something complicated. It went along this blue line. In other words, if you're looking at this, the particle like slowed between red dot number 1 and red dot number 2. In reality, this particle like was moving backward, was moving to the south for a little while, let's say. Like it was moving toward the x-axis for a little while. And then like it got around here, it slowed down to 0, and then it started moving the other way. Like this particle was moving south and then it was moving north. Or you could say it was moving left and then it was moving right. Or you could say it was moving downtown and it was moving uptown. Like I don't know but it was definitely changed direction, this particle. And it was moving slower and slower in one direction and then faster and faster in the other direction, right? It didn't have one velocity. It didn't move at a constant velocity. It didn't move in what would be represented on this graph as a straight line. Like it didn't advance the same number of steps of space for every step of time. Like it didn't. It moved in what's depicted here as a curve. But if I draw the dotted straight line between the 2 endpoints of its motion, the slope of that line is the particle's average velocity between those 2 points. The average velocity, in other words, of a particle is the change in its position per the change in its time. In other words, the rise over the run on a graph like this. But that's its average velocity. What I'm sort of trying to remind you from the back door or put in some kind of way is if you take that concept to the limit, right? If you don't want to know on average how fast something is going, if you want to know how fast it's actually going at an instant, in other words, if you don't want to know how fast on average something was going between 2 points in time, if in fact rather you want to know how fast it was going at a point in time, like that's a very different question. And that's not called average velocity. That's called instantaneous velocity, you may recall, right? This here, in other words, this is, Like V with a bar over it means the average velocity describing some interval between 2 points. In fact, I'm going to say this. I think we might have mentioned this with our definitions of space and time, but maybe not. Hold on. So I'm writing, and I'll go back to this page again in a second. I'm saying average velocity, average anything, is a concept that applies to the entire interval, or segment or region between 2 points in space and time, 2 events. I think we've defined that in this class, but the average velocity of some particle is something that describes its motion throughout an interval between 2 points in space and time, whereas instantaneous velocity, or instantaneous, really anything, but instantaneous. And again, I'll turn the page back if that's desired in a second. The cop does not pull you over out of any concern for your average velocity. The cop pulls you over out of concern for your instantaneous velocity, right? Like, again, this is an old distinction, it's a physics 1 distinction, but let's let's drum it in. Like if I'm driving down the highway and the cop pulls me over, and right, and this is John Jay, like maybe I even know the cop, maybe he's been in this class, and the cop pulls me over and says, "Do you know how you were just driving past a school zone, or you were just driving through a school zone, past a school? Do you know how fast you were going a moment ago?" If the cop says that to me, maybe I've mentioned this in this class before, but what I should not do, John Jay or no John Jay, if a cop pulls me over and says, "Do you know how fast you were just going?" There's a million things I should not do, clearly, but one of them that I should not do is say, "Well, gee, officer, I'm glad you asked. Speaking as a physics professor, let me explain to you that I've been in my car for the last half hour, and I left my house a half hour ago, and my house is actually 10 miles from here." Now granted, like I did pull over and take a long rest in the middle, and like I went to a rest stop and I got gas and all this. But the fact is that I live 10 miles away and it's taken me a half hour to get here. So I guess on average, I've been going 10 miles per half hour, which means 20 miles an hour. So I don't see the problem, officer. Like I totally should not say any of that at all for 1,000 reasons. Especially not looking the way I do. I probably shouldn't say anything, but I should definitely not. If the cop pulls me over and says, "Do you know how fast you were just going?" I had better not start telling the cop about some larger displacement that I'm now dividing in my mind by some larger time interval. Because while displacement divided by time does equal velocity in physics, it equals average velocity, right? The total amount of space that I've traveled per the total amount of time that I've traveled gives me how fast on average I've gone for that whole duration. It doesn't say anything about how fast I've gone at any given instant, right? For example, I might have pulled over, been in a bathroom for a super long amount of time, and then made up and compensated by going super fast for the last 2 minutes. And that's why he's pulling me over. He wants to know how fast I was going, like right now, or just a moment ago, not throughout a set of moments, but at a moment. When the cop asks for, in other words, instantaneous velocity, the thing that we actually care about frequently in life, instantaneous velocity is not about your velocity between 2 points in time or space. It's about your velocity at a certain point in time and space. And that's why I want to focus. And that's a harder thing. That's a much easier thing to care about, but a much harder thing to compute or to know for sure. Okay. And I want to, and the way to know it is, one way is to think of it as a derivative, as in from calculus. That's where I'm going with this, but I think there's something in the chat. So hold on a second. Oh, there's a lot in the chat. Hang on a second. Maybe they're jokes, but that's fine. Oh yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Wait. Yeah. Wait. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No. Right. And right. So you definitely get. Well, I'll tell you from my experience, it would not get me. If I said all that, it would not get me out of speeding ticket. They just like hate me more for, it wouldn't work for me. But if it works for you, go for it. Yeah, well, right. But believe me, I've tried. But the thing is, if they were a good enough physics nerd, and this is where I want to go back to Kat's other, like earlier thing in the chat, and the real problem with me, like, first of all, I hope we all understand, like, we shouldn't be wise asses to cops anyway. And it never is never a good idea to try to show them that you're smart or something like that. But furthermore, I would actually be wrong to do that, is what I'm really trying to say here. Like, even if the cop was a physics nerd, or especially if the cop was a physics nerd, like, the cop would actually appreciate that, in fact, I am totally dodging his question if I say all that stuff. Like, even if it sounds impressive, it's actually a big smokescreen. It's like actually not cool for me to say all that stuff, because really, truly, like, say I like zoom past a school going way too fast. What the police officer is actually saying is, right at that moment when you pass the school, you were going way too fast. Like, and no matter how slow you might have been going for the hours prior to that, like, even if that's true, that on average you've been crawling along down, at really low rates of speed, that still doesn't tell us anything about what you're actually going at one instant of speed, and what you're going, and that's relevant. Like, what, in other words, average is what's happening between 2 points. Instantaneous is supposedly what's happening at a point. But it does raise the question. How are we ever confident? How do we ever know what's going on at one point? Like, if we're talking about instantaneous velocity, we're talking about the velocity something has at a moment. Now, velocity, like average velocity, was how far you get in how much time. So if we want to talk about, if average velocity now, I'm being fast and like I'm sort of right. I'm being funny about what I'm trying to say is that average velocity is how far you get per how much time elapses. Like, it's a per, like, yeah, how far in space divided by how far in time. It's a perfect parallelism, space on the numerator and time in the denominator. But generally, whenever anything starts, that's when whenever we start paying attention to an experiment, we start our stopwatch. So whatever the first instant in time of anything that we're watching is, we usually call 0. So I usually drop this T0 thing, right? But I just want you to see that there's still a parallel. Basically, what I'm saying is this is still some kind of rise over some kind of run, is what average velocity is. But if we want to know instantaneous velocity, if we want to know at if I want to talk about V, not with a bar over it, like V with a bar over it means average. If I want to talk about V not average, V at an instant, V without a bar over it, if I want to talk about not average but instantaneous, it would seem that what I'm talking about then is like something like this. It would seem, this is the paradox. If I want to know how fast, like it seems that what the cop is asking for on the one hand is something totally realistic and important. How fast was I going just now? Well, what does that mean? How fast was I going just now? It means how fast was I going like between now and now, not between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, not how far did I get during the hour that elapsed between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and not how far did I get in the half hour that elapsed between 2 and 2:30, not even how far did I get in the minute that elapsed between 2 and 2:01. Evidently, what I'm asking here now is how far did I get right at 2 o'clock? And that seems like a reasonable question because I certainly was going some fastness at 2 o'clock, like I was doing something. But right at 2 o'clock, not between 2 and 2:01, but right at 2 o'clock, no time passed at all, right? Like the amount of time, like the run on the time axis, if we were making a graph, right at 2 o'clock, well, there's no run at all. It's just from 2, like T sub 2 is 2 o'clock and T sub 1 is 2 o'clock. So T2 minus T1 is 0. So you'd have 0 as the run in the denominator of this slope that you're calculating. But then if you look at the rise, like how far did I get in that time interval? Well, that time interval wasn't an interval, apparently. It was an instant. No time passed at all. So presumably I didn't get far at all. Presumably I got nowhere at 2 o'clock. In fact, I could even back that up with evidence. If you took a sort of evidence, if you took a photograph of my car as it was whizzing down the highway at 2 o'clock, if you took a photograph right at 2 o'clock and then showed me the photograph, I would see a car in that frame, in that slide. And since basically no time passed in that slide, I would see the car in the slide, not moving in the slide. The car would just be there wherever I took the picture, like right in front of a tree or something. So what I'm getting at, there's a slippery notion here. I'm not trying to confuse anybody. I'm trying to say that there is something that is confusing and worth thinking about whenever we want to discuss instantaneous rates, like instantaneous velocity, which we often do because it is the realistic, important thing to talk about, like how fast is something going right now. It raises a paradox because if we take our old definition of average rate and we just try to apply it now to 1 point rather than the interval between 2 points, what we get, it seems, is 0 over 0 every time, right? Like no matter what, whether the car is moving slow or moving fast, if you just take a snapshot instant, particles don't get nowhere in no time. I'm sort of right. If you want to know how fast something's going at an instant, you want to know how fast something's going at when no time passes, like at a moment. And at a moment, so you want to know how far does it get per unit time at a moment in time, but it doesn't go anywhere in a moment of time. So at one level, it would seem that every single time we ask the question, what's something's instantaneous rate of velocity, it would seem that no matter what the circumstances are, we should get 0 over 0, 0 distance in 0 time. But that's bizarro, as I'm sure you can see, like, Actually, since I'm talking so much, let me ask you guys, what's 0 over 4? It's like a weird question, but what's 0 divided by 4? Anybody? Yes, totally. That was fast, Scott. Wow, that was great. And you could still, other people can still answer. Sorry, I don't mean to, but that was really fast, and that's awesome. And anybody can answer if you want the points or whatever. But yeah, I do agree though. 0. Okay, 0 over 4 is 0. 0 over 5, in fact, is 0. 0 over 6 is 0. 0 over anything, x, right, is 0. Like, I agree with Skyla and Rahel. So 0 over anything is always 0. But on the other hand, what's 4 over 4 or 5 over 5 is 1, right? Oh, that was fast too. That's also on different people too, which is great. Oh, that was really, you guys are so, wow, we're totally going to end on time as a reward. Yeah. And you're way ahead of me. Okay. Right. So look at this. Well, okay. Exactly. Okay. So wait, yes. So, and yeah, like check this out. We're saying if you and I'm not making this up to be annoying. I'm making this up to. I'm not making this up. I'm talking about this to address something that is like funny in nature or at the simple level of space and time that we need to kind of confront. That it seems like a very straightforward notion, like distance equals rate times time. Rate is how far you get per how much time. Like to say that someone's going 30 miles per hour means, oh, if I wait an hour, they'll cover 30 miles, right? I mean, and if I wait 2 hours, then they'll cover 60 miles. And how do I know that they're going 30 miles an hour? Well, maybe I only clocked them for like a minute. I only watched them for a minute, but they went half a mile. Right in that minute, they went half a mile. So then I multiplied up and realized, oh, if they keep doing that for a full hour, they'll go 30 miles, right? But you need a slice of time to observe the slice of distance that occurs. And then you put them together and you're in effect getting a slope on a graph and you're saying, aha, here's the rate between those 2 points. But if you just look at a point, which we should be able to do, but if you just look at a point, you're going to get 0 over 0 every time, it seems. And to get 0 over 0 every time is a real kick in the head because, first of all, I don't want to get the same answer every time. I think some cars are faster than other cars. Like I shouldn't. Second of all, 0 over 0, as you're all pointing out to me, but let me have the pleasure of, elaborating. 0 over 0 is like a triple, like paradox crazy town problem because 0 over anything is always 0. Anything over itself is always 1, and anything over 0 is what you might call undefined or infinity or like you get the home game. So we have a notion. So Okay, I clearly need to start budgeting my screen space better here. This happens every time. But what I'm trying to say right now, yes. Oh, wow, wow, wait, hold on. Let me see what's happening in the, oh, this is cool. What's happening in the chat. You're definitely on to, yeah. Oh, good. Oh, yes. No, this is very good. Wait, all the way back to the cat thing about something over zero is undefined. Absolutely. DNA, right. Oh, does not exist. Right. Very good. Any way you want to say it, undefined, does not exist. In physics, frankly, well, actually, I'll pause on that for a second. I totally want to get to what's then also happening with Veronica and Skyla in the chat here. And I also am aware of the time. We're almost, we're almost where we need to be, and we're almost going to be done, which is nice. Just in time for another Pokemon interruption. But this is good what you guys are saying. Let me pause. One thing, anything over zero, right? In a math class, you can call undefined, or you could say DNE does not exist. Can I just say, as a word from our sponsor or a shout out, in physics, we actually don't say does not exist or undefined. You can totally say that. I'm not saying it's wrong, but in physics, we generally say, actually, yeah, let me. And this will bring us to the Veronica and Skyla point about limits, which is our ultimate point today. And that's where we'll end today. If I don't fully relate this back to homework 2, if I don't finish showing you how this ties back to homework 2, then I apologize. And I will clarify that next time. And again, if you're looking to get another point back on homework 2 at any point, you believe me, you'll be able to, if that's the issue. So it's possible I won't fully tie all this back by the end of today. If I don't, I will next week or next time. But you guys really do seem to know what you're talking about. So let me try to feed this for a moment. In physics, we say that something divided by zero is infinity or goes to infinity in that limit language. And that's kind of an important thing to realize. In physics, something divided by zero, we say is infinity for this reason. And infinity we like in physics, we believe in infinity. Of course, in calculus, people believe in infinity too. We love infinity and we feel like we can deal with it all the time, which is sort of interesting. So when something's divided by zero, we don't actually throw it out and say it can't be dealt with. It just can't be dealt with finite numbers. Actually, is that worth developing? Just meaning this. It always comes down to basics in physics. Just remember what it means to divide one number by another. Or there's many different ways you can look at it, but one way you can look at division is as successive subtraction. What I mean by that is okay. Think about 8 divided by 2 for a second. I mean, I think this is worth considering for a second. Think about and I'm talking right now. I'm not actually asking anybody anything. This is rhetorical, but take 8 divided by 2, right? 8 divided by 2. What does that mean? It means how many times can I add 2 to itself until I arrive at 8? Or put another way, how many times can I subtract 2 away from 8 until I get down to 0? It's how many 2s can I fit into 8, right? That when we say what's 8 divided by 2, in a way, that's what we mean. How many 2s can we fit into 8? And so we say the answer is 4. I know 8 divided by 2 is 4, meaning that I take 2 and add it to itself, and then add it to itself, and then add it to itself a final 4th time, and I've reached up to 8. So it takes me 4 times of 2 to get up to 8. I know you know that, but let's take that pattern and apply it now. Let's say if I divided 8 by a smaller number, if I divide 8 by 1, instead of doing 8 divided by 2, well, 1, is smaller. So it takes a lot more of it to add up to 8, or a lot more of it can be subtracted away from 8 to get 0. So if I do 8 divided by 1, that's a smaller number. I would say the answer is 8, right? Like as the denominator gets smaller, the answer to the whole division problem gets bigger. So if I now do 8 divided by 1/2, right? If I do, like, 8 divided by 2 was 4, but 8 divided by 1/2, like a much smaller number, is now like 16, right? Like I could fit 16 1/2s. I can add up 1/2 like 16 times till I get all the way up to 8. If I do 8 divided by 1/4 now I'm getting 32, right? If I do 8, so if I divide 8 by smaller and smaller tiny fractions, it takes more and more of those tiny numbers to add all the way up and fit into 8 or make up 8. So take that to the limit, take it to the extreme in your mind, and imagine dividing 8 by tinier and tinier and tinier numbers. Your answer will be a greater and greater number. It takes more and more little things, little fractions, to add all the way up and make up 8, right? So if you go all the way to the limit and say, how many times can I add up 0 to itself before I get up to 8? Like, how many zeros can I fit into 8? Like, I would say, as a physicist, looking at the pattern that the smaller the denominator, the bigger the overall answer, the smaller thing that we're trying to fit into 8. And of course, I'm just using 8 as an example here, but the smaller thing that we try to fit into 8, the more of them it would take until I get all the way up to 8. Well, then if I go to the limit and add up nothing, like how many times can I add up 0 before I arrive at 8? I can just keep adding 0 to itself infinitely. And I would have to add 0 to itself infinitely to get up to 8, is like one way of thinking about it. Or just put in much simpler terms, as the denominator gets smaller, the whole answer to the question gets bigger. So if we take the denominator to the smallest possible place, 0, the whole answer would have to go to the biggest possible place, infinity, is one way to look at it. I don't know that it helps anyway. But now what that all leads us to is this idea of limits. Like Veronica and Skyla and Kat are bringing up limits. I want to say ultimately, yeah, like, and this is where we'll end today. I know if I can make the connection. I want to say, on the one hand, the cop has a legitimate question. He wants to know how fast I was going right now. Like, because right now I could have hurt somebody, right? Like, it's a real thing. Like, how fast was my car going right now? And of course, even if I think about my car driving for a full hour is just a sum total of lots and lots of right nows, right? A movie consists of nothing but a set of frames put all together to make one big movie. Well, if in each one of so it's legitimate to ask, if we have a movie of something moving and it's made up of nothing but a bunch of frames, what motion is occurring in any of these frames? And so it's a legitimate question. What we seem to be saying is, well, in each individual frame, there's either 0 over 0. I mean, there's either nothing, or there's infinity, or there's 1. But like in each one of these frames, nothing distinguishable seems to be going on. Yet there is nothing but frames and something is going on. So what do we do? How do we resolve this? And yes, what we do is what 3 of you have said in the chat, and what all of you, I think, are drawing from math. We say that, therefore, instantaneous velocity is average velocity, right? What instantaneous velocity is, it is rise over run. It is how far you go in some interval of space per how much time passed while you did that. But it's taken to the limit. Oops, sorry. As t goes to 0, meaning, as you know from calculus, um, Meaning, and yes, it's totally like asymptotes and limits and all of that. But meaning, if I want to know how fast I'm actually going at some moment, at that asterisk, at a particular t, not how fast on average I'm going between two t points, but at one t, what we do as a matter of practice, or why we believe that we could even, if we want to know the v there, it's like asking, we want to know how steep the curve is, what the slope is at that point. We know in our minds that there's something wrong with that idea. Like something can't have a slope at a point. Something can't have a rise over a run at a point, because at a point there is no run and there is no rise. But what we're saying to ourselves is that it's not an isolated point. We don't want to know the steepness of an isolated dot, because that truly makes no sense. No more than do we want to know the motion in some isolated photograph of a still life. Like if you take a photograph of some, we don't want to know what motion there is in just an abstracted, isolated frame. We want to know how fast something's moving in some frame that is attached to the larger context of a bunch of frames. Like the context cannot be ignored here. And so what we do is we say, aha, if we want, and you know this, but I'm just putting in physics language now. If we want to know how fast something is going at that asterisk, but we only have a definition that tells us what to do between points, what we do is we take those two, we take the two surrounding points and we bring them closer and closer. Again, this is what 3 of you were talking about in the chat. But we take those points and we say, aha, if we get the average, if we take the average of the motion between those 2 points, that'll be sort of close to the actual reality of the actual point we want. Sort of close, but not that close. If we look at the average between closer points, we'll get an approximation that's closer to the actual reality, right? The closer we bring our, in other words, if we want to know how fast we're going at 2 p.m., we could figure out the average between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. and just assume that that average was pretty much captured by what was happening at 2 p.m., but we're going to be pretty wildly off. We could do a better job by saying, well, what's the average between 1:59 p.m. and 2:01? And now whatever that average is, I mean, it didn't have room to change that much, right? If we squeeze down to 2 points in time, very, very close to the one we care about, it's true, we're still going to be making an approximation. If we say that how fast you're going at exactly 2 is approximately how fast we're going on average between 1:59 and 2:01, there's still room for deviation and weirdness and inexactitude. But if we squeeze it even further and say 1:59 and 58 seconds to 2:00 p.m. and 2 seconds, now we're even closer. And now here's the thing here. So we get closer and closer, right? This is this whole limit concept. Now we're saying if we have 2 points, that's two, technically that's 2 spread out. We're getting an average, not an instantaneous there. If we have exactly 1 point, that's a problem because then we have no interval. And we're going to get 0 over 0 over time. So in math classes, we say we go to this netherworld. We go to this in-between zone of the limit. And this is what really pissed me off the first 400 times I ever heard this in a math class, okay? I'm telling you, I love this now, but I didn't love it then. So I'm telling you it my physics way now at the risk of boring you all or whatever. But this whole limit idea, the limit, which is supposed to be like I know you know this, but the limit as 2 points sorry. The limit as the interval between 2 points is what I'm trying to say. Sorry. The limit as the interval between 2 points Whoa. I don't know what just happened. Whoa, sorry. Did I just lose my board? Hold on a second. Oh, maybe not. Okay. Oh, I just lost the board. I know. Hold on one second. And I also know that class is just about over. Sorry, but this is an okay place to end with. I'll put the board back. Hold on. Once again, the big punchline, I'm squeezing at the bottom of a board, which is not good. Please write this bigger in your own notes, or please know that these last words that I'm about to show you back. Hold on. It's coming. It's coming. It should be coming. Should be coming. What's happening? Are you seeing? No, you're not seeing the board. I see that you are not seeing the board. I don't know why I just gave out at the last minute. Oh, okay. What is happening? Oh. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we're totally talking about tangent lines here, and I know I'm now rushing and being weird because we're about to, but here's the whole thing of the limit, okay? The limit as t approaches 0, the limit as the run approaches 0, like this whole thing, what I'm ultimately trying to say, again, with limited time, this whole idea that I'm saying that instantaneous velocity, in effect, is average velocity taken to the limit as t approaches 0, like that. Oh God, that is what I'm saying. And in a way, I'm saying I think you've seen this in calculus before, but the way I'm trying to put it now. So yeah, instantaneous velocity is the limit of average velocity as the time interval approaches 0. Put another way, instantaneous velocity is a derivative. It's a rise over run. It's a rate of change. It's a slope, but taken to the limit. In other words, it's the average velocity between 2 points in the situation where the 2 points are so close together that we can almost call them 1 point, but not so close together that we actually call them 1 point, because if they were 1 point, it'd be 0 over 0. Okay, that whole weird idea. And again, I know there's 2 minutes left, but that weird nether idea that they say in math where we're going to the limit. We're not squeezing the 2 points all the way to 1, because then we'd fall off the cliff and we'd have 0 over 0. And we're not actually leaving the points separated, because then we would just have a regular slope, an average. We wouldn't need a tangent line. We wouldn't need asymptotes. We wouldn't need derivatives. We just have a slope. The fact that we say we're bringing the 2 points so close together that they're almost 1, but not quite 1. Okay, first of all, that used to always bum me out, especially in a math class, because I thought math was exactly the one kind of class where we weren't supposed to get such vague notions as that. Like, that seemed very vague and very weird to me. Like, come on, is it 2 points or is it 1 point? What are you people talking about? Thought I. Well, here, the one perspective I want to suggest right now today with the 1 minute we have left is in science or in physics, that limit is actually a lot easier pill to swallow, I think, because what we really mean by the limit is we mean the region of immeasurability. What we really mean when the cop, and we're going to end on this, but when the cop pulls you over and says, how fast were you going right now? Or he has a radar gun that tells you how fast you were going right now as you pass the radar gun, or even like in labs, we have photo gates that do this. Like, what I want to say to you is what's going on there when a radar gun actually tells you how fast you're going at a point in time. Like, how is it doing that? Like, what do we mean by the limit as the 2, like, is it 1 point or is it 2 points? Like, what realistically actually is it? Here's the deal. What it is 2 points that when we talk about instantaneous velocity or when a radar gun measures velocity, and I know I have to bring this all back to homework too, but when we talk about instantaneous rates in physics, like how fast you're going at a point in time, what we're really talking about is how fast you're going in an interval of time that is super small, like it's big enough to be observable. So like basically what really happened is the cop had a gun trained on you. Like he had 2 points in space that were really close together. And you, Pat, crossed over 1 point in space, and then you crossed the second point in space. And they were really close. And then he had an interval of time that was really small and divided the space by the time. So it's a super, super small interval, but it's still finite. It actually is 2 points in space and 2 points in time. And we're measuring what's going on in between. But why we say it's the limit, why we can then confidently say, oh, that's your instantaneous velocity, even though we just measured like 3 milliseconds from 2 p.m. to 2:00 in 3 milliseconds. And so technically we really were just measuring an average velocity. We were technically just measuring how far your car got in like 3 milliseconds, which is an average, not an instant. Here's the twist. Here's why it's in the limit, or why we call it instant, because our measuring equipment doesn't get any more precise than that. Like we measured your car, is the idea, across a time limit that is as small as our clocks can detect. So any smaller limit of time we can't distinguish at all. In other words, in other words, we measured an interval of time like 3 milliseconds for which your car was traveling during those 3 milliseconds. And if it happened to deviate in speed at all throughout the 3 milliseconds, like because it was actually only an average over 3 milliseconds, right? If the car actually was going fast at the beginning of the 3 milliseconds and slow at the end, such that our approximation for the whole thing would actually be inaccurate, we're still saying it's accurate, and we're saying we don't care, because in those 3 milliseconds, whatever your car did, our measuring equipment can't pick it up. Any deviations in your speed were too precise, too subtle, too many significant digits for our measuring equipment. Therefore, as scientists, we have to say we have no knowledge of those numbers. Like that is beyond that. That's for philosophy or religion or math. But science is about that which is measured. So even though I know I've totally run out of time speaking of measurement, what I'm trying to say is what we really mean by the limit in science is we mean small enough to be there and care about, but so small that anything smaller than it, we can't measure any differences. So we can be comfortable that whatever happened in that interval, it's an average and it's an instant. It's one and the same, because any way in which the average deviated from the instant is beyond our measuring detectability. Therefore, science has no right to speak about it. That's what we mean by a limit. How this has anything to do with the springs or homework 2, unfortunately, I'll get back to you next week. I apologize. But that's just my perspective on what a derivative is or what a limit is. It means the quantity that applies to an interval between 2 points that is so small that our measuring equipment can treat the 2 points as one. That's what we mean by a limit or by a derivative in physics. I'm sorry, I went 3 minutes over. That's all for now. There's no new homework or anything because I need to catch myself up anyway. Sorry. Yes, we're totally over. Right. Sorry. Yes, we're totally over time. I'm totally done. Sorry. You should. But the before, yes, like the song. Okay, I'm good, but I am over time. I'm sorry. So goodbye. No new homework. Have a great break. Blah blah blah. But thank you. You have a good one. Thank you. Oh, and if anybody has a Mewtwo, if you have a Mewtwo in Pokemon Let's Go, like send me a text message and let me know. I'll give you anything for it. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, learn. Okay. Have an awesome break. Yes. Have a great. Yes. Thank you. Have a great break. Yes. Have a great. Bye. You're the best. Seriously, you're a good class. You put up with a lot. Goodbye. I miss you already. My son's running up. Okay, I'm gonna exit. Okay, goodbye. Bye. Thank you.